Good evening, all, and welcome to this evening's member event on Voices of the Past, the 1904 World's Fair Diaries. I really appreciate all of you being here this evening, and thank you so much, first of all, for your membership support. I know you hear me say this a lot, but truly, nothing that we could do was possible without your support. So thank each of you so much for being members of the Missouri Historical Society. We have a great program this evening. I want to remind everyone that the Q&A function is enabled. So if you have any questions, please use that feature, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen in order to ask questions. If you think of one as we're going, please feel free to go ahead and submit your question. If not, we will have that Q&A session at the end of the program. So go ahead and put your questions in there so that they're ready when the Q&A program starts. So without that, I would like to hand the program over to our presenter this evening, Molly Codner, who is one of our archivists. So Molly, take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Rebecca. I am so happy. Thank all of you for joining me tonight as I take you back on a trip to the 1904 World's Fair through the words of the people, a few of the people who attended the fair. Now, I have to start with two confessions. First of all, I must admit that I've often wondered about people's great interest in the World's Fair. It is one of our most popular research topics here. And I know it was a big event for the city, but I've often wondered why people continue to study this event and research so many different aspects of the fair and write about it and collect items from the fair. My second confession is that I am no expert on the 1904 World's Fair. If I have a question, I would go to Sharon Smith, one of the curators here who planned our World's Fair exhibit, or Jason Stratman, who answers reference questions that we get about the World's Fair. So at this point, some of you are probably wondering why the Missouri Historical Society asked me to give this talk, or more importantly, why you decided to listen to it. But I'm happy to tell you that I've grown to appreciate the World's Fair in a whole new way after spending the past several months reading the diaries that I will be sharing with you tonight. These diaries and the emotions expressed by the people who wrote them really helped me to understand the significance of the fair in the lives of these people and the history of this city. I can't advance the slide, just a minute. Okay, sorry about that. So in the early 1900s, the citizens of St. Louis watched as the western half of Forest Park was transformed from this area full of trees and wilderness to this, as one of the diarists described it, to this beautiful ivory city. So tonight we're going to be looking at the diaries of these three people. The Missouri Historical Society has received many items about the World's Fair over the years, including a large collection of papers and photographs from the Louisiana Purchase Exposition Company that planned the fair. We've also received many tickets to the fair and specific events that were held during the fair, and invitations and souvenirs, etc. But over time, we have also received letters and diaries from people who visited the fair, but they are much more rare. So while we have several in the archives at the Missouri Historical Society, tonight I'm going to focus on these three: Edward V.P. Schneiderhan, Edmund Philibert, and Adele Quinnett Phelps. Adele, I have to say, is really the reason for this talk. We received her World's Fair Chronicle from her descendants last year. And it was extremely exciting for us because it had been several decades since we had received any kind of World's Fair diary. However, all of these letters and diaries really give a true sense of the extraordinary experience of attending the World's Fair in St. Louis. While I still cannot say that I am an expert on the fair, I can say that I'm an expert on these diaries. And these documents and the people who wrote them have a few things in common. First of all, they were all from St. Louis. Also, many wrote about watching the construction of the buildings and visiting the fair, and then their feelings at the end of the fair. They all visited the fair multiple times, and I mean many times. And the fair was a major event in their lives from its opening on April 30th to its closing day on December 1st. Also, they all wrote these documents for themselves in order to help them remember the fair. Of course, not ever realizing that they would be donated to the Missouri Historical Society and become part of the historical record of the fair. They also all lamented the fact that the buildings and the fair were temporary. Even as the fair was still going on, they were still dreading the fact that not only was it going to end, but it would be torn down. They all said that it was difficult, if not impossible, to describe the fair in words. But fortunately, they found a way. And after reading these diaries, I have a new appreciation for the fair. It was a major event for the city. And I hope after hearing parts of these diaries, you will gain a new or increased understanding of the fair from these voices of the past. So I'm going to start with Edward V.P. Schneiderhan. He was 30 years old in 1904. He was single, and he lived with his father and other family members at 1129 South 7th Street, which is in the area where Ralston Purina is today. He was educated in parochial schools and graduated from St. Louis University in 1894 before getting his law degree from Washington University. He then worked as an attorney in St. Louis. Edward started keeping diaries in 1890 at the age of 15 and continued writing until 1913, filling 7 volumes, which were donated to the Missouri Historical Society by his widow in 1961. His daily entries document his, work life and his daily activities. But his entries from 1904 include descriptions of more than 20 visits to the fair. In December of 1904, when the fair was over, he decided to write a more extensive 26-page memoir specifically about the fair so he could remember everything. So I want to mention also that most of the pictures that I use in this presentation are from our photographs and prints collection here at the Missouri Historical Society. So I'm going to start with Edward's entry for opening day on April 1st, 1904. He wrote, "With Adolph, went to the World's Fair. Opening. The picture is grand, the scale immense, the distance is enormous. It is a pity that there are so many statues exhibited, even on the grounds, absolutely naked. In Chicago, it was worse, but in no place is there any excuse for this. A proper respect for man, if not decency, ought to be sufficient motive to omit such unnecessary exposure. Illumination at night was wonderful, far surpassing in brilliancy and grandeur the Chicago exposition." So I guess he wasn't pleased with everything about the fair. Next, I'm going to talk or read Edward's description of the Machinery Building, which he visited on September 20th, 1904. He wrote, "In afternoon at fair, in Machinery Building, astounding mechanical contrivances, enormous engines, monster cranes, attended lecture in Westinghouse exhibit, learned much. Will go again to lecture and learn the lesson better. Examined a steam turbine engine, the first you have seen. understood now the reason of its greater efficiency and enormous speed when compared with other steam engines, have read so much and never could get a very clear understanding. The steam turbine engine will work a revolution on steam engines. An evening attended the concert given by French band. It is unsatisfactory to be alone at the fair, but no one would go with you. Must go when you can, and so must go alone. He wrote a much longer entry on closing day. He wrote on December 1st, 1904. With Alf and Julia went to the fair. Last time. The 2 trips up the pike were made amidst the universal din and with much merriment. But the party's trip in the quieter parts of the World's Fair picture permitted much more real enjoyment, for the crowd on the pike was getting unruly. The end of the line we had formed had much trouble with disturbers. The later the hour, the rougher the crowd. Had it not been for an overwhelming force of police and guards, the mass of people might have deteriorated into a mob. Strange idea, to celebrate the close of the greatest World's Fair ever held by an attempted rioting, in a small way. With Alf and Julia, after attending the closing day exercises at the Louisiana Monument, passed rapidly through the manufactures, liberal arts, government, mines, and education buildings, not to see anything, but for the purpose of casting a last look on scenes that had become familiar and dear, and from which we must part forever. After lunch, passed through the varied industries and transportation buildings. Arriving at the agriculture building, the doors were being locked and nailed, 4 p.m. The people were carrying exhibits off bodily, could not get in. Went to Philippines to see peculiar drill of scouts at 4:30, which had been the delight of every World's Fair visitor. In the evening, we were a numerous party, had some difficulty in meeting at the Alps. After a due regard to the prevailing custom of celebrating the close of the World's Fair by passing up the pike and making some noise by blowing horns, we went out into the main picture to view the Cascades and the beautiful festival hall for the last time, resplendent in all their indescribable glory. The night was wonderfully mild. Shortly before 12 midnight, the scene was illuminated by beautiful fireworks, but the German house bells tolled a wonderfully solemn farewell. It was most affecting. There were many about you, but your thoughts were your own, and you hardly know whether you could give them apt and accurately. At promptly 12 o'clock, President Francis turned the switch that controlled the power and the light. The flood of lights grew fainter and fainter, and of a sudden all was darkness. The Cascades were silent. The scene was dead. The World's Fair no more. Passed into history forever. Our company passed out of the gate, not entirely silent, for we remarked the want of joviality, but we were altogether grave and very subdued in spirit, for it was indeed a solemn occasion. It is a hard task to become reconciled to the end of the World's Fair. So as I mentioned, those were his diary entries, but he also wrote a 26-page memoir to more express his thoughts and memories about the World's Fair more at length. So he wrote, "Have felt the necessity of writing a more concentrated article on the World's Fair. It did not seem right to pass that subject with the few disconnected and scant memoranda you had been able to make. The site selected was the western half of Forest Park. It was a pity to see giant monarchs of the forest fall before the woodman's axe to make room for the exhibit palaces. Standing on one of the hills in the pre-exposition period, one could see a whole plain that had been swept bare of patriarchs of the forest, such as few cities could boast to possess. Have gone out to the fair sometimes on Sundays during the pre-exposition period, and enjoyed a quiet stroll among the buildings which became prettier every month. It was a pleasure to walk along among the completed exhibit palaces and admire their graceful outline and splendid proportions. The picture of the fair was as a revelation, its beauty indescribable. Standing in the Plaza St. Louis and looking south, the eye met the Louisiana Monument, an ornamental towering column surmounted by the Statue of Peace and decorated with tablets and reliefs commemorating the purchase. Passing the monument and still looking south, the eye beheld the Grand Lagoon, and at its further end, the beautiful Cascades, taking their origin out of the main center of the classic and inspiring and majestic Festival Hall. The Festival Hall was flanked by two gracefully curved rows of colonnades serving as the background for the Louisiana Purchase state statues erected in front on the Terrace of States. Each wing of the colonnades pointed to an architectural gem. Festival Hall, the colonnades and end wings and colossal fountains, all on the so-called Art Hill. The combination was simply overpowering. When the cascades were in operation and the fountains played, one could fancy himself transported to fairyland. But when one would consider, in addition, the magical view from this eminence of the main picture of the fair, words fail. It cannot be even hinted at by words. Stopped at this central point for hours to drink of the magic inspiration that this wonderful spot offered. Wish that you could describe it. The beauty of this place was such as to fix the beholder to the spot. It was truly wonderful. The view across the lagoon to the Louisiana Monument and the Plaza St. Louis beyond, dotted as the scene was with green trees and all the ornament of art, was simply indescribably grand. But it is impossible for language to express the actual reality. It is a pity that it is impossible for language to ever adequately describe feelings. And here at the World's Fair, it was scarcely believable that any beholder could see these unforgettably beautiful scenes without the deepest emotion. But it is not possible to dwell on every feature of the fair, have omitted much that struck your fancy and attracted your attention. But in making the above extended notes, extended for your time and purpose, have been guided by the desire to have something to look to as your personal memoranda of the fair. No pretense that it should do justice to the subject. I think it's funny how his perspective on the fair changed when he first was talking about the statues, but clearly appreciated the beauty later on. So our next diarist is Edmund Philibert. Edmund was approximately 30 years old in 1904 and unmarried. He came from a family of skilled laborers. His father was a tinsmith, and Edmund was a carpenter by trade. In 1904, he lived with his mother and other family members at 4206A Lexington in North St. Louis, not far from Fairground Park. Edmund was the only one who regularly mentioned how he got to the fair by taking the streetcar. And he also was the only one who mentioned using the intramural railway that they had established to carry people from one side of the fair to another. Edmund visited the fair 28 times, primarily with his sisters Angie and Florence. He kept a diary, and he also kept a list of how much money he spent for each visit, which were donated to the Missouri Historical Society in 1969. So again, I'm going to start with Edmund's impressions of opening day. He wrote, "Angie and I made our first visit to the fair today. We carried a lunch with us and arrived at the main entrance about 12 o'clock. We stood in the Plaza St. Louis in front of the Louisiana Monument, where there was speech making until about 1:45, but we heard none of the speeches. At 1:45, the cascades and fountains started to flow, and the flags on all the buildings were unfurled, one after another, amidst great cheering by the crowd. We next strolled along Louisiana Way to the west end of the Transportation Building, where we viewed the parade, which was composed of the Pike attractions. Headed by the mounted police, we saw Jim Key, the educated horse, Eskimo, Chinese, Japanese, Turks, Indians, Filipinos, Boers, etc. After the parade, we sat on the steps of the unfinished Italian pavilion and ate our lunch. Then we went through the Forestry Building, the Transportation Building. We went through varied industries next. Then we took the intramural at station number 16 and rode to number 1. The car was so crowded we had to stand. After leaving the car, we walked up the Plaza St. Louis to the Cascades, crossing DeSoto and Jefferson bridges on the way. As we ascended the steps, the Cascade showed to better advantages, and although a little disappointed at first sight of them in the afternoon, we now both thought they were grand and stood watching them until the illumination began. As the lights were turned on for the first time, the people raised a hearty cheer, for it was a grand sight indeed. We went back to the Plaza St. Louis by the same route by which we had come, and left the grounds at the main entrance where we had no difficulty in securing a Del Mar car. We arrived home about 9:15. Now, my favorite entry of Edmonds is his description of November 10th, 1904, when he made his 21st visit to the fair, which included a visit to the Temple of Mirth on the Pike, or as he called it, the Foolish House. He wrote, "Next I took the crowd to the Foolish House, and I nearly laughed myself sick. There was a sign outside which said souvenir rings given away today. I asked Angie if she wanted a ring. At first she said yes, then as she thought it was a joke, said no. We all assured her it was no joke, and the ticket seller asked what size ring she wore. She didn't know, so he said, 'Hold up your hand, please. How do you think this size would do?' Taking up a couple of sleigh bells and ringing them while the crowd roared with laughter. On entering, a man cheerfully invited us to be seated on a couple of chairs facing a looking glass. Thinking the trick was in the mirror, I was just about to sit down, but I remembered the trick chairs just in time. Later, we had the satisfaction of seeing one of them collapse as a man sat on it and went sprawling on the floor. Farther on, there were a number of mirrors which distorted the figure in the most comical way imaginable. A number of peepholes were, upon putting your face against a small opening, you would be surprised to see it on the body of a monkey, a convict, etc. On his 23rd visit on November 19th, 1904, Edmund mentioned seeing the Missouri Building. He wrote, "While passing the Missouri Building, I remarked to myself how pretty it looked when illuminated at night, and thought I must visit it sometime at night. I pointed out the dome of the Missouri Building to Mama when we heard the fire department rushing towards us. We stopped to let it pass, but it went by the Liberal Arts Building. Then another passed over the next street. In a few minutes, they were coming from all directions. By this time, we could see the smoke and smell the wood burning, so we started back to see what was burning. On reaching the foot of the hill at the end of the government building, the black smoke came pouring down so thickly that I was afraid to go farther. We found out that the Missouri Building was on fire, so we turned back to meet Angie at the St. Louis statue. While waiting for her, we saw a part of the fireworks, and when she came about 7 o'clock, I started for the fire while the rest of them went on to the Pike. I crossed the Plaza St. Louis and Joliet Bridge, went along the waterway to the Plaza of Orleans, crossing the DeSmet Bridge, went around the Mines and Fisheries buildings, and up Government Hill to the Louisiana Building, where I watched the fire a while." And finally, Edmund's remarks on closing day. He wrote, "I made my 28th and last visit to the fair today. I entered at the Lindell entrance about 4:45, and as this is the last day of the fair, I proceeded to get a last view of the Pike. I entered at the east end, and it was jammed. Everybody was in a jovial mood and seemed determined to have a good time. There were horns, cowbells, rooster calls, feather ticklers, confetti, and any number of other things very much in evidence to help make things lively. Continuing on, I walked through the sunken garden and along the government terrace and over the plateau of states to station number 14, where I took the intramural alighting at number 1. I walked up to the Grand Basin and sat watching the Cascades a while. Then I ascended to the Terrace of States, and as this was my last opportunity, I spent some time viewing the Cascades and illumination in all directions. Then descending the east steps, I walked along by the Grand Basin and Plaza St. Louis, taking a farewell look at everything as I went by. And it made me feel a little sad to think that it would soon be all over forever, for I had spent many pleasant days there, but everything must come to an end sometime. So I left Lindell entrance for the last time at about 7:30. Just as a closing remark about Edmund's days at the fair, reading his, it often reminds me of childhood visits to Disney World, where, I mean, he did as many things as he possibly could for each visit. He must have been exhausted by the end of his visits. So finally, we get to the reason why I just was asked to give this talk, really, the Chronicle of Adele Quinnett Phelps. And this is a photograph of her that was also donated by the family from around the time of the fair. Adele was born December 23rd, 1887, the daughter of Stephen Francis and Lydia Quinnett. I should mention here that her grandfather, Oliver Quinnett, was involved with, was in real estate and involved with acquiring the land that became Forest Park in the 1870s. And also, her uncle was Oliver Quinnett Jr., and he was a very well-known, fairly prominent businessman in St. Louis in 1904. And it seems, based on that information, that Adele had much more access to the fair in terms of going to receptions and things like that. So in 1904, Adele was 16 and a student at Hosmer Hall, a private school for girls. The family lived at 4460 Morgan Street, now known, and Morgan Street is now known as Delmar. So the Quinnett family home, excuse me, was on Morgan between Taylor and Newstead, about 2 miles from Forest Park. Adele visited the fairgrounds with her father almost every day between Dedication Day, which was exactly a year before the opening fair, and opening day. She then visited the fair 84 to 90 times after it opened. So this is the cover of what is now known as the Adele Quinnett Phelps World's Fair Chronicle in the Missouri Historical Society archives. As you can see, the front cover is labeled diary. However, it is immediately obvious when you open it that it is not a diary. It does not consist of daily entries of her several visits to the fair, like the other two examples that I've talked about tonight. This appears to be more like a school project, written as a book with chapters, and I've made a list of the chapters. The introduction is a history of fairs, and I mean a history of fairs. She goes back to Roman fairs and then more modern times with the Crystal Palace in London in 1861, the Chicago Fair, the first in the United States, the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia in 1876. And then she goes to chapter 1, where she starts talking about the growth of the Louisiana Purchase Exposition. But first she gives a history of the Louisiana Purchase itself. And then she talks about cleaning the location for the fair, and how they chose Forest Park, the most beautiful in the city of St. Louis, according to Adele. She watched as she talked about how they cleared the trees and started to build the sewer, and how the varied industries building was the first to be built. And then she says, one of the most interesting things to me was to watch the men make the staff for the outside of the buildings. It is also very interesting to watch the different races of people erect their buildings. And then in one of first of many quotes where I think she should have been the official booster for the World's Fair, because she says, the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, which covers 1,240 acres, is larger than any other exposition that has ever been given. The vast sum of $50 million has been gathered together to hold this great fair. This exposition presents an entirely new view of the world's progress and achievements. So Adele also includes a couple maps in her chronicle towards the beginning. Now, this is one that is not seen very often. In fact, I didn't recall ever having seen a map like this that showed the city and then the location of the fairgrounds. You can see here. She also included this ground plan of the fair, which is much more common. So you can see the Grand Basin Festival Hall here, and several of the other buildings that she'll be talking about. I also wanted to include, this is a map from our library. It's called World's Fair Then and Now. So it shows the location of the buildings on a map of today. So you can see the varied industries, the manufacturers building. She talks a lot about these. Of course, this is where the art museum is now on Art Hill. This was where Festival Hall would have been. I want to point out here, this is where the Philippine exhibit was, kind of in the area where Concordia Seminary is now. So I just wanted to include this to give you all a perspective of the things that I've read so far and the things that Adele will be talking about. So I'm going to start with her chapter 2. This is a page from her chronicle, and she included several snapshots of the buildings. I decided to not zoom in on them just so you could get a sense of what the whole page looks like. Now, I cannot confirm that she was definitely the one who took these snapshots, but it was either her or a family member or somebody that she knew well. So the government building is located on what is now Government Drive near the World's Fair Pavilion and the Boathouse. So Adele wrote, "This is the largest exposition building ever erected by the government. The building is nearly 800 feet long with a width of 200 feet. I think the government building is the most interesting building to me on the grounds." Then she goes on to describe various exhibits in the building, including the model of the Library of Congress. And she wrote, "Some of the best known manuscripts and letters of our country are displayed here. Among some of them is an old letter written by Andrew Jackson and some papers regarding the Louisiana Purchase. This display shows the growth of the library in the United States." So I made a slide as the heading for each chapter. These are not, these are part of, these photographs are part of the Missouri Historical Society photographs and prints collections. These were not ones that Adele took. You'll be able to distinguish those fairly easily. But chapter 3 of Adele's chronicle is liberal arts and manufactures. And she wrote, 4 buildings having a total of 46 acres are devoted to the departments of education, liberal arts, and manufactures. At Chicago, the exhibits of these departments were contained in one building. In the Department of Liberal Arts, to which 9 acres are devoted, besides space for outdoor displays, will be shown complete printing offices in operation, the latest models in military, civil, and architectural engineering, chemical industries, medicine and surgery, music, photography, and papermaking. The Department of Manufactures is contained in 2 buildings covering an aggregate of 28 acres. In one of these is displayed the general line of manufactures, together with the processes and methods of production, and the other, known as the Palace of Varied Industries, are shown the products of those industries which combine art and handicraft. The Palace of Liberal Arts is one of the stateliest of the many great exposition structures, situated north of the Sunken Gardens, and is 525 by 750 feet, costing $475,000. So then, just to go back to the then and now map. So this is the liberal arts building here. The Palace of Manufactures is right here. Education and social economy is right here. And varied industries is over here. So you can see kind of where they were around the tennis courts and the history museum. So again, this is a page from Adele's chronicle, and about the Palace of Manufactures, she wrote, "This is one of the first buildings to attract the eye as a visitor enters the main gateway. It is on the east side of the main court and stands symmetrically with the Palace of Varied Industries, having the same general dimensions of 525 by 1,200 feet and covering 14 acres. The cost of this building was $719,000. Now, she has several, I don't know, souvenirs and things that she took with her from the fair. So this is an example of something that she got from somebody from Japan who had a display in the Palace of Manufactures. So I just wanted to include that. I think it's really pretty. The next building is the Palace of Varied Industries. And she wrote, this building is one of the larger of the exposition buildings. The palace has the same proportions as the Palace of Manufactures, 525 by 1,200 feet, covering 14 acres. The cost of this, one of the most magnificent of the many exposition palaces, was $604,000. And finally, from this chapter, the Palace of Education and Social Economy. Of this building, she said, education is for the first time at an exposition made an independent department and is honored with first place in the classification list. It is given a large and handsome building covering 9 acres. The building is near the Cascade Gardens and is surrounded by the lagoon system. The building costs $319,399. Interesting school exhibits from all parts of the world with the latest methods of instruction and demonstration constitute the chief features of this department. It is really quite interesting to go through this department and to see the different work done by the children in the different parts of the world. So the next chapter is the 2 buildings of recent years. So of the Palace of Machinery, she writes, the Palace of Machinery is 525 by 1,000 feet. All around the building are names of many inventors of machinery. The building is situated at the west end of the lagoon. The cost of this palace was $496,957. One of the most striking features of the exposition is the power plant. Never before in any exposition has there been even half as much power. In a large boiler house standing west of the Machinery Hall, filled with latest and best productions of skilled boiler manufacturers, steam is generated to supply over 30,000 horsepower to the various engines in the machinery building. In addition to this, about 10,000 horsepower is received by electric cable from power stations in the city of St. Louis. This machinery plant supplies the power for the electric lights, the cars, the pumps for the cascades, and everything that needs machinery power at the exposition. The total horsepower used at Chicago did not exceed 12,000, and at the Pan American not over 8,000, in comparison with the 40,000 to 50,000 here. The Palace of Electricity, she wrote, electricity had only 5½ acres at Chicago, while at St. Louis, 9 acres are given to the same department. Never at an exposition has such a magnificent building been set apart for electricity. It fronts upon the Grand Basin. It is entirely surrounded by lagoons and is reached by bridges. The building costs $399,940. The electrical exhibit shows the newest types of machines and apparatus for the application of electrical power to useful purposes. One of the most interesting machines to me was a machine which is able to bore holes in iron and also to shave iron. Telephone and telegraphic instruments and stations, wireless telegraphy helped to make up this display. The wireless telegraphy was especially interesting to me, as I had a chance to hear over it. The sound, instead of being transmitted over electric wires, is transmitted over a beam of light. Another thing of interest to me was to see the sewing machine being run by electricity. Not only is America represented in this electricity display, but every other nation that knows anything about electricity is represented here. So the next chapter is transportation and mining exhibits. First, the Palace of Mines and Metallurgy. 9 acres of space is here provided for displays of the rich products of mines. This palace is 525 by 750 feet and is situated south of the Sunken Gardens. It costs $498,000. 12 acres are devoted to outdoor mining. In this building are shown mining machinery and processes for deduction of ores and extraction of the pure metal. The most interesting exhibit to me was the display of the petrified woods. It is really marvelous the number of beautiful colors that are in one piece of wood. Missouri has a splendid display of granite, copper, limestone, sandstone, lead, coal, and many other valuable ores. Not only has this display a large and interesting exhibit under roof, but there is a display out of doors in the southwestern part of the grounds that is fully as interesting and perhaps more beneficial to the people because they can not only see models of coal and lead mines, but they can go down in a mine themselves and see the miners at their work. And next, the Palace of Transportation. This is the largest building in the main picture and is 525 by 1,300 feet, covering 15 acres. The building is situated west of the Varied Industries and north of the Machinery Hall. It cost $696,000, and it is considered one of the most beautiful of exposition structures. Upon the 4 miles of railway track in the building are installed complete trains of the finest workmanship. In the transportation building are displayed the latest patterns of trolley and electric cars, showing what is used in different parts of the world. And I think that it is generally agreed upon that St. Louis makes the finest electric cars. The most interesting novelties in the Department of Transportation are the various types of airships. There has been a number of balloon races during the fair, for which large prizes were offered. I want to pause here just to mention the size of this building. Based on the then and now map that I showed you, the Palace of Transportation was on the south side of Lindell and filled almost the entire block from Skinker to De Pere Road. So quite sizable. The next chapter Adele titled 3 Fascinating Departments. First, the Palace of Agriculture. The most conspicuous site in the exposition is occupied by the Palace of Agriculture. Standing on a hill in the western part of the grounds, it looks down upon nearly all the other exhibit palaces. The building is 500 by 1,600 feet. It contains over 18 acres of floor space, being the largest exposition building ever erected for a single department. All kinds of agricultural machinery and farm implements are included in the agricultural exhibit. The display of butter is certainly fine. There are many life-size models of cows and people made out of butter. The best display in this building are that of California and Missouri. The California display is mainly fruits and vegetables. I don't believe I have ever seen such large bunches of grapes, oranges, sweet potatoes, and all other kinds of fruits and vegetables as are displayed here. The Missouri display is made up mostly of grains. All around the room, which is set apart for their display, are pictures made out of grain. Along the west side of this building is what a great many people call Hungry Alley, because different firms such as the Force Breakfast Food, Heinz Pickle, Yale Coffee, and many others have their stands and give away small samples of their food to the people, hoping, of course, by giving these samples that this will induce someone to purchase a can or package of their food. Now, I have to pause here just to mention that I am sitting right now in the Missouri Historical Society Library and Research Center, located at 225 South Skinker. In our building, this building would have been right in the middle of the Palace of Agriculture. So next is the Palace of Horticulture. She says, this is the largest building ever erected in an American exposition for horticultural. It is 800 feet long with an extreme width of 400 feet. The central and western portions accommodate the displays of fruits and their products, machinery, implements, and devices used in fruit culture. The eastern end is glazed to serve the indoor plant displays such as palms, ferns, aerial plants, etc. The two main displays are the California display and the Missouri display. Both of these are excellent. And finally, the Palace of Forestry, Fish, and Game. Adele did not have a picture of this one in her chronicle. So again, this is a picture from the Missouri Historical Society Photographs and Prints Department. But of this building, she wrote, midway between the administration building and the Palace of Agriculture in the western part of the World's Fairgrounds is the Palace of Forestry, Fish, and Game. It is 200 by 600 feet, covering 4 acres. The Department of Fish and Game aims to show what the various states are doing in the preservation and continuation of the supply of fish in their various streams and lakes, and the systems adopted for the protection of fish and game. So chapter 5 is the Palace of Art. Of this palace, she wrote, this majestic architectural group consists of 4 great pavilions, 3 of which have a total northern frontage of 836 feet. The central building, 848 by 666 feet, is a fireproof construction. It contains a large hall for statuary, 94 by 157 feet, with galleries on either side for paintings and other precious artworks. The side pavilions are each 200 by 422 feet, containing many galleries. The 4th building is a hall of statuary, and the group is arranged so as to form a large central court. The buildings contain a total of 184 galleries. The site is upon the wooded plateau, 60 feet above the general level of the main group of buildings, just behind the Festival Hall and Terrace of States above the Cascade Gardens. The cost of the Palace of Art exceeds $1 million. The central building of gray limestone and brick is to remain on the ground, a lasting memorial of the exposition and a permanent art museum for the city of St. Louis. On each side of the main entrance are seated figures, one representing sculpture and the other representing painting. Above the main portico are 6 figures symbolizing the 6 great periods of art: Egyptian, Classic, Gothic, Oriental, Renaissance, and Modern. So one inescapable part of the World's Fairs at the turn of the 20th century, including the 1904 World's Fair, were the anthropological exhibits of people from other countries and Native American Indians. These exhibits were part of the planner's goal to highlight civilized American society compared to these other cultures. In her chronicle of the fair, Adele includes descriptions of the villages and the people, many of which very clearly portray the prevailing opinions of that time. I am including here only her description of the village. She wrote, one feature of the exposition is the collection of living specimens of strange people, people that we have never seen before, people from all parts of the world. We not only see the people, but we see the way they live and dress. The Philippine Islands, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico for the first time make exhibits at an exposition. The exhibit of Philippine Islands represents an expense of about $7 million. Over 30 acres are devoted to this most interesting display, which is situated a little to the west of the agricultural building. There are many different tribes to be seen here, and many native villages in which the people are occupied in the native arts. Over 1,000 natives are established upon the Philippine allotment, about 1/2 of the number made up of soldiers who are guards, while the others represent almost all the native tribes. The natives live in huts like those built by themselves in the Philippine Islands. The 2 most interesting villages to me were the Igorot and the Moro village. I think the Igorot village is one of the most interesting places at the fair. Now, as I mentioned, she does have some souvenirs here. So this is a sketch of their chief Antonio, which was drawn by an Igorot that is included in the chronicle. And she also got the Apache chief Geronimo lived in the Apache village at the fair for 6 months during the fair and sold his autograph for 10, 15, or 25 cents. Adele does not mention anything about him in her chronicle, but she obtained his signature and put it in the book. So the next section is main features of the exposition. And the first one is the festival hall, garden, and cascades. Of that, she wrote, "The Cascade Gardens and their surrounding architecture constitute a decorative scheme that defies ordinary description. The festival hall is 200 feet in diameter and 200 feet in height, its roof the largest dome ever constructed. The colonnades on either side extend 700 feet each way and terminate in very ornate refreshment pavilions. Each of the colonnades is divided into 7 parts, in front of which have been arranged 14 statues, symbolical of the states and territories which have been carved from the Great Louisiana Territory. The Cascade Gardens are laid out with the most beautiful flowers and shrubs. On either side of Festival Hall are 2 immense shields made out of flowers, in the center of which are the 3 honored initials, LPE. The main cascade starts to flow from the center of Festival Hall, but it is not only the rush of water, but it is the statuary that surrounds it that gives the whole picture that grand and imposing appearance. The 2 smaller cascades start from fountains on either side of Festival Hall, directly in front of the 2 pagodas, and all 3 rushing down over the mighty steps unite in the main lagoon. At the head of the main lagoon are 4 beautiful fountains, which add greatly to the picturesque scene." And then she has 2 main pictures and a night picture. She wrote, Although there may be many beautiful pictures in the art gallery, there is none that can compare to that of the Ivory City. No one can imagine what a beautiful sight it is to stand upon the terrace of states and look down upon the beautiful ivory palaces mingled with the large forest trees and partly surrounded by the blue waters of the lagoon, revealed against a background of snow-peaked mountains. Another beautiful picture is to stand just at the head of the main lagoon and look up at Festival Hall and the mighty cascades rushing from it and falling down over the steps into the lagoon, which is generally thronged with the beautiful gondolas, with their gondoliers singing their native songs. Certainly, no exposition ever had or ever can have such pictures as may be seen at this one. The Cascade Gardens, stretching over a distance of nearly half a mile in a graceful curve with their many flowers, statuary, and fountains, make a beautiful picture as seen by day, but altogether a different picture when under the flash of the wonderful electrical treatment at night. Under the artistic touch of the electrical worker, the entire gardens and their attendant features glow with a soft and beautiful radiance. Adele also writes about the floral clock, which she says was the largest timepiece in the world, is upon the northern slope of Agriculture Hill. It is a landmark by which visitors half a mile away easily read the passing hours. The dial is 112 feet semi-diameter. The hands each weigh 2,000 pounds. The minute hand is 74 feet long. It moves around at the rate of 500 miles a year. There are 13,000 plants in the clock to show by contrast of colors, in numerals 15 feet long, the hours and minutes. Gigantic as it is, the floral clock is moved by machinery as complete and as reliable as a standard clock. The monster hands are moved by compressed air instead of by springs or weights. The still shaft connects the underground clockworks with a pavilion. In the pavilion is a fine astronomical clock protected from dust, but seen through a plate glass front. The hours are struck by a large bell weighing 5,000 pounds. An immense hourglass with 100 pounds to run through it is near the floral clock. As the hour strikes, the hourglass reverses. And of course, she has to talk about the pike. She wrote, "The different amusements are nearly all arranged along an avenue, which has been named the Pike. The Pike is situated on the northern part of the grounds, and it runs east and west, being nearly a mile in length. The Pike is a place to go to have fun. But don't go there unless you are in a good humor and prepared to be knocked in the face by a feather duster or have your ears ring from the shrilling sound of the horns. One may enjoy going through the exhibit buildings and looking at the beautiful displays of the different nations. But to keep going over the same kind of ground and seeing exhibits on the same order soon becomes monotonous, and one needs a change. So for this change, turn your steps toward the pike. I want to end, of course, with, since I did opening and closing day for the other two diaries, Adele has a long list of opening days that she described, but I'm going to focus on opening day and closing day. Of opening days, she wrote, "Opening day, which fell on the 30th of April, 1904, was a beautiful day. We started out in the morning and saw a good bit of the grounds, but we did not attempt to go in any of the buildings, as there was such a crowd, and we knew we would have plenty of time to see them all thoroughly. The exercises were held on the Grand Plaza of St. Louis, on the main avenue of the Exposition in front of Cascade Hill. After hearing what we could of the addresses, we ate our luncheon, and then went and mingled in with the crowd to wait for the button to be turned on at Washington. It was touched at 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock at Washington. Then it really was a sight to see the people crowd to see the water rush out of Festival Hall for the first time. After watching the water flow for about a half hour, we made our way over to the government steps, where we viewed the parade." And finally, closing day, which was also known as Francis Day. Adele wrote, "Francis Day fell on the last day of the fair, and it was a day of joy and sorrow. Mother and I started about 12 o'clock, and after meeting Father, we went through a number of the large exhibit buildings and finally down the pike. Much to my sorrow, I was not able to come out in the evening, so we were obliged to walk down the pike for the last time in the afternoon. Although I was not out to the fair when it closed, I heard the last show of the gun and the clock strike 12. I never had such a strange feeling as I had at that hour. It was a feeling of joy and sorrow. It made me happy to think we had all been well and able to enjoy the fair, and also to think what lovely weather God had given us, and that the whole thing had been carried out to such success. But on the other hand, I could hardly keep the tears back when I thought of all those beautiful buildings being torn down and of the beautiful Ivory City being swept out of sight." So with that closing of the fair and Adele's chronicle, I close this talk. Thank you for joining me on this tour of the 1904 World's Fair with the voices and words from the past.
Thank you so much, Molly. That was so interesting.
Thank
We do have a couple of questions that have already been turned in. There was an earlier photo that was shown that was colorized, and someone asked if it was colorized by pen or pencil.
I don't remember which one was colorized. And I would assume by pencil. I don't know the answer to that question, quite honestly.
Okay. What was the price of admission?
It was just a few cents actually, and I think it varied. And they had ticket coupons. And again, I'm going to stress I am no expert on the World's Fair, and it's just why I started with that. I would have to double check and answer that question. And like I said, Edmund Philibert, he kept a list of his daily expenses for the fair. So I can check back and answer that question.
Okay. One person asked, I wonder how many people made multiple visits. And I think the answer to that is many, right?
I would think many. I mean, based on the fact that, and I actually was going to originally include another diary and a set of letters, and those people made multiple trips to the fair. Now, I don't know that many made 84 to 90 trips like Adele did. Like I said, she had access that I don't know that most people had, but 28, I mean, the other two made at least 20 trips to the fair. So I think it was common. And like I said, I mean, to me, it was like going it read like going to Disney World and trying to fit in as much as you could in a day.
Right.
There was just so much to see and do, and seeing
Yeah.
things that they had never seen before.
Yeah. And I mean, my dad grew up in Tampa, Florida, and they went to Disney all the time because
Yeah.
exactly that reason. They were close by and it was very easy to just go and see a few things each time they went.
Yeah.
Um, Ken asked, what happened to Adele?
Oh my gosh, I knew somebody was going to ask that question. She lived in St. Louis, so she married a man with the last name Phelps, and she lived in St. Louis her whole life. And she actually just died not too long ago at the age of 99. So,
Wow.
and I know that, I mean, her she kept this the people who donated it were her grandchildren primarily, and they said that she would get it out and show it to them, show the Chronicle to them, and tell them stories about going to the fair. So she was sharp as a tack and still remembered going to the fair. And I do know that one of them told me that she traveled extensively, and they thought it was might be due to seeing all these different cultures at the World's Fair.
That is so cool. And then we did get one comment, with inflation, I'm overwhelmed by the cost of the buildings.
I know. That's very true.
I mean,
That's very
especially
true.
when you consider that so much of it was built for temporary, like
Right, for
purposefully
temporary
temporary.
person. Yes. And I mean, the art museum, I think, was the most expensive because it was, meant to be permanent. But yeah, that's very true. I mean, to even talk about the fact that this cost tens of millions of dollars in 1904 is pretty remarkable. Oh, I think you're muted, Rebecca.
Sorry, I was muting myself because my dog is using a squeaky toy. Uh, well, if there are no other questions, one person asked, what impressed you most about the diaries in the fair?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think, like I said, well, number one, that they all went so many times, but just it really, you just get a sense of how completely overwhelming the experience was for them. And the fact that, I think it was funny that they all mentioned many times how it was hard to put into words what they had seen. And yet clearly they found a way to do it. And like I mentioned, I mean, I said it kind of as a joke, but I love the fact that on opening day, Edward Schneiderhan, spent most of his time talking about the statues of naked women. But in his memoir and on closing day, he was lamenting the fact that those were all going to be torn down. And it just what an important event it was for the not even the city, but the people in the city. And what a significant event it was in their lives.
So we have two other questions about Adele. One was, how old was Adele when she wrote this? This attendee was late to the talk.
She was 16 years old, and she was a student at Hosmer Hall, that was a private girls' school. And we think, the family and I think, that it was something that she wrote for school, for a school project. And I have to say, as I was reading it, I was really wishing that if it had been a school project, the teacher would have written notes or a grade on it, because honestly, if she did not get a good grade on that, I just don't know, because it was, I mean, it was a tour of the World's Fair.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking about that. But yeah, the other question we got is, did Adele make any mention of the flight cage?
Not that I remember, no. No, which is weird because she mentions just about everything else. But I mean, she arranged it very much in chapters. I She might have actually. She must have because she mentioned just about everything. I just don't remember everything. I will say also, I want to add that this entire volume has been digitized and is on our website. And I don't know if we can get the link out to people,
Yeah,
Rebecca.
absolutely.
But I mean, it's worth flipping through it and reading it just to see the rest of it. I mean, it is, I think, 180 something pages. So I just scratched the surface of what's in there.
That's fantastic. Yeah, so we will be sharing this program with all of our members in our next e-newsletter. And if you get me that link, I can also make sure to include that as well,
Right.
along with the
Okay.
link to the program. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, well then, thank you, Molly, first of all, for putting this program together. It was super interesting, and I know a topic that so many of our members love so much. Thank you to each of you members for attending tonight and for your membership support. If you do want to see this recording or any others, you should be able to access them through your e-newsletter. If there is a specific one that you'd like to see that you missed, reach out to me and I can make sure that you get that link. Thank you again, and I hope everyone has a great evening. Bye.